All right. Thank you, Dennis, and thank you, everybody. David G., definitely powerless over lust and sexual acting out. And I'm grateful to be here today. I'm so thankful for these past 21 weeks that we've had to journey through this book together up to where we're at now. It's just been it's been awesome for my recovery. A lot of people have reached out to me and told me how much they've gotten from it. And, I'm grateful for that. But I tell you, it came along at a time in my recovery when, I was really unsure of sharing the big book anymore because of the place that I had put myself in and the things that I had done in another fellowship. And, there was just a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. And I just felt very inadequate to do that. So the first few weeks, maybe more than that we went through that, there was a lot of fear. I talked to a lot of people about it. And, I'm grateful to say that as time went on, that began to change. There was something within those weeks that happened in my recovery that really sent me back to the focus of the book and the recovery and practicing it in my own life. And what a journey it's been for me coming to Sexaholics Anonymous. It's, my sobriety date here is October the 1st of 2019. And however, as most of you have heard through the weeks, I've been a part of the other fellowship for more than 26 years now, 26 and a half years. And I joined that program in August of 94. And, it's, I'm so grateful for that fellowship. Even today, I am so grateful for it. I really had felt that I had done some wrongs there that was unforgivable. You know how big our ego is. We're either everything or we're nothing. There's not a lot of God in the middle of any of that, and that's where I was at. And whenever I came to you 15 months ago. So to share my experience, strength, and hope, I've been asked to do this a lot of times through the years. And boy, I used to jump all over the chance to do that anytime. And anymore, it's just, this is my least favorite part of the program is sharing my experience, strength, and hope from what used to be the podium. And, I would rather work with another sexaholic any day of the week is do that. Sit down and put somebody into this book and show them the message of recovery is to share my experience, strength, and hope with it. However, I was asked to do that today, and I'll do my best to do that. I grew up here in southeastern Oklahoma, and I grew up with an active alcoholic, very mean and abusive alcoholic. And my earliest memories of sex was really bad. I was molested by some teenage brothers and even the stepdad at that time. And that's a memory that I had blocked away for a lot of years. But I grew up very sad and very isolated and very angry. And, although I didn't really remember that part of my life, I was real young when that happened. The physical abuse and the whippings and stuff like that continued with the stepdad up until the point to where I just got old enough to put a stop to it is what happened. So when I was 15 years old, he came in one morning and he was going to get me up for school. And being an alcoholic, he had given me a drink of alcohol a few years before that. And it just changed my whole life. I wasn't afraid anymore as I had been in the past. I wasn't as scared. Anytime I drank alcohol, it just always kind of settled me down. But there was just something about it. I always craved more and more and more. So this particular night, I had gotten pretty drunk, and he wanted me to go to school the next day, and I just couldn't get up. And he brought in what we call in Southeast Oklahoma moonshine whiskey, and he brought a quart of that in. He opened the lid, and usually, the blue funnel will come rolling out of the top of that. And, he usually would dance it under your nose, and that's enough usually to get you up by itself, but I didn't. And, he became very angry, and he pulled me out of the bed, and he began slapping me around, and he slapped me out onto the front porch, and he cut wood and sold it to different people in this part of the country. And I can remember from the corner of my eye, I just seen a stick of wood laying on a pile, and I picked it up and hit him in the head with it and killed him. It split his head open. He fell to the ground, and I was scared to death. And so I ran away, and I ran to a nearby park, and there was a guy there, and, he introduced me to drugs that day, and my life it went off. I took off, I ran. I ended up having to pay for that in some ways. And, I had to go spend some time away for a little while. But in the midst of all of this, there was something about just watching the fear in his eyes just before, he died that really I don't know, you know how we are as obsessive people. I just grabbed a hold of that and I started using that to instill fear in everybody that I knew. And, you know, a lot of people had heard about that around town and they became very scared of me. And a lot of the young ladies in town, you know, began to give themselves to me. And that really set up obsession at an early age. And I used that power to have my way with just about everybody that I wanted to. And this behavior continued on and on. I met a girl from Lubbock, Texas, some years later, and I ended up really liking this girl. I didn't know anything about relationships. I'd never been taught anything about it. Only thing that I knew about was, you know, sexual acting out. And that's what I was doing with this girl. And it seems like that's when that part of me, that addict within us that we talk about so much, just really, really came to life. I heard it put this way, you know, I don't know if I was born a sexaholic, but I can tell you that day a sexaholic was born. And man, I just became so obsessed with that. And not just with her, with anybody and everybody and just anyone that I could. And so that behavior continued throughout my lifetime. Now, drugs and alcohol took me to a place that I didn't want to be. It got very bad. I tried to sober up. I don't know how many times. I had 2 sons by this lady. I missed both of their birth. The first one, I stepped outside to go have a drink. I ended up with someone in the parking lot. I acted out with another woman, and I was gone for more than a week while she was up there giving birth to my first son. A year or 2 later, my second son was to be born, and he was, you know, I'm a member of the Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma. That's my tribe. I'm Choctaw Indian, and she was there having my second son, and shortly after that, I ended up in a detox, and you know, I just couldn't get sober and I couldn't stop acting out. So, you know, I ended up coming home. I eventually ended up losing that marriage. And, you know, it wasn't because of my drinking and it wasn't because of the other things I was doing. It was because of the acting out, and I just could not stop. And, you know, of course, I didn't know I really had an issue with it at that time. In 1994, you know, and that's skipping a long way ahead. And I had a lot of incidents in between there, but I want to get sober. I ended up in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, that had not been my first time to go there, but that time I came and it took. And, you know, I met some people. They were full-blood Choctaw Indians here in southeast Oklahoma. And they brought me in and they helped me to get physically sober, and they began to teach me their ways. But there was one man there that had really, really good recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous. And he knew the big book. I mean, unlike anybody I'd ever met at that time. And so he started journeying me through that book. In fact, I stayed there for about 6 weeks and I ended up leaving. I was in another relationship at this time, but I couldn't get sexually sober. So I figured, well, alcohol's the trouble. I get rid of alcohol, the lust will go away. I should be okay. Well, I was definitely wrong about that, because once it went away, then it got worse. But anyway, he put me into the book and he took me through the first 3 steps. And what happened was I had a spiritual experience as the result of those first few steps. And man, it changed my life forever. And the way that I looked at the book, because I'd read the book quite a few times, I just read through it, but never was I able to see the book the way that he was showing it to me. And I can remember we got to page 63 and we ended up going on through the rest of the steps and I got sober. But he was so in depth with the first 3 steps that really attracted me. And so I can remember going back to him and saying, hey, look, I need to go through the rest of the book the way that you've laid out these first few chapters. I'm interested in doing that. And he said, well, I'm sorry. He said, you know, I can't do that. And I thought, what do you mean you can't do that? I mean, you have covered that almost sentence for sentence up to this point. And he said, I don't have that experience with the rest of the book. I apologize. And man, I was just heartbroken. This was in 1990, I don't know, 5 or somewhere in there. Anyway, I came home for a little while and, you know, my youngest son drowned in Lake Monroe, Indiana. I was 9 months sober. And man, I just went crazy for a little while. But this guy called me up and he said, hey, I want to introduce you to a guy. He said, there's going to be a man speaking at the midwinter conference in Oklahoma City, and his name is Charlie P. He is Charlie of Joe and Charlie, and I want you to go by and talk to him, and I want you to tell him that you know me and that we've met and that your interest in the book is to learn more about the big book and the way to read and study it. So what happened was I ended up going to that midwinter conference, and I met Charlie P. and I talked with him for a little while after he spoke on Saturday afternoon. And I asked Charlie, would he be willing to mentor me and sponsor me? And he said he would. He said, you know, of course he was a very busy man, but we did get to spend some time together. And through what he taught me one-on-one and through his tapes with Joe M. And back in those days, the first Joe was around quite a bit. There were two Joes. There was Joe M. from Little Rock, Arkansas, and then there was Joe M. from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so I knew both of those men pretty good. But anyway, Charlie had taken me through the book, and man, it was just an experience of a lifetime. I started going to meetings. I began to share. My life began to straighten out. I mean, there were things were happening to me that only God could have done, and I knew it. But there's one thing that I didn't address, and that was lust. And lust came back. It came back after a couple of years of that experience, and it never let me go again until I came to you October of 2019. And I tried several times. I met some of the best men that the program had as far as sharing the message with me. I kept going back. I kept reworking the steps. I'd do the 4th step. I'd do the 5th step. I'd get up to around step 9. I really wouldn't do a whole lot. And I would just relapse over and over and over and over. And this just never ended. So I found myself starting to act out in the fellowship. Charlie passed away in April of 14, and Joe M. from Tulsa passed away a little while after that. And I was asked to speak at Joe's memorial. There was several of us that was asked to speak, and I was one of them. So when I got there and I spoke at his memorial, from there, I started getting asked to do a lot of different circuit speaking and big book studies all around. And there was a guy there that had been sponsored by Joe. And in fact, we have some tapes together, of some of the book studies we have done. And I don't know, it just took off from there. And what happened was whenever I started doing that, lust came on me in a way and I started acting out in the fellowship in a way that was just unbelievable. I just could not stop. And there were a lot of people that looked up to me, and there were a lot of people that had really gave themselves to the program through the big book studies and the readings that we had done. So in 2005, my wife and I opened a group here in southeastern Oklahoma. It was known as the Broken Bottle Group. And man, that thing came alive because it was big book oriented all the way. And man, it was a success. That thing, I saw God take that from just a few members to over 100 members in just a little while. And everybody was starting to get sober through the book. Well, of course, my ego, I told the story of the donkey last week. I became the donkey. I started thinking this was all about me. But what happened was I started acting out inside of that group. And that was bad news, real bad news. A lot of these women my wife had sponsored, she was very active in the program as well. A lot of people, Joe M.'s wife that she sponsored, I started acting out with them as well. And it was just an endless cycle, and I couldn't stop. I met a guy who was sponsored by the late Don Pritz, and he had started taking me through the work of the big book again. And the one thing that we determined where I'd always failed was I never finished my amends, for one thing, as best I could. And the other was that I never practiced 10 and 11 on a daily basis the way I do today. And so I came through this process of the book, and I really felt like for the first time that I was going to get free of lust. I just felt that in my heart. And Dennis had a meeting last week. It was called The Ego Does Not Go Quietly. And I can tell you that my ego did not go quietly. That thing come alive. I tore a bicep at work about 3 or 4 months, prior to all of this taking place. And what happened was they decided that they were going to do surgery to fix my arm because I was still young enough. I wanted to work and continue on with my career. And I can remember rolling in that day to go have this bicep cut open and fixed. And I was going to be out for a long while. And I can remember thinking to myself that day, my life is never going to be the same again after this. I had worked through the 4th step, all the way through the 4th step, and I was ready for step 5. And I was flying out to Cedar Rapids, Iowa to meet with my sponsor and to do this 5th step when the surgery hit. And so I had to postpone it. He said, well, no worries. I'll be in Oklahoma in 5 weeks and we can do it then. Well, my disease of lust and sexholism did not wait 5 weeks. What ended up happening was I come out of that surgery. I got a few days behind me. I was home. They gave me oxycodone for the pain. That's a big no-no for somebody like me to even begin with. And I read on there, it said take 4 a day as needed. I didn't see the part as needed. So I started taking 4 a day. This doctor's like, my God, I know people that are chronic, that don't take 4 of those a day. But what happened was I became very crazy in the mind. I got my days and nights mixed up, and I thought someone was trying to rob my house in the middle of the night. And so I got a gun. I went out in the yard, and I've always been very explosive anyway, over craziness. And there was a guy over there, and he was just screaming to the top of his lungs, you need to turn this out and this out and this out. And so we argued back and forth for a little while. And what happened was I pointed that gun in the direction of his voice, and I shot. And it hit the corner of his house rather than hitting him, thank God. But, I could have killed somebody. The cops were all over the place, all over my neighborhood. And my wife slept all the way through this. She didn't realize any of this was going on. And so anyway, long story short, 2 days later, I ended up with a couple of newcomers out of the group. And, man, my life went downhill fast from there. There was another lady in the group that got a hold of some messages that I had sent out to these girls. And she went straight to district with it, the district in Oklahoma City. And I had the alternate delegate give me a call and said, David, what in the hell have you done? I mean, oh, my God, this isn't good. This isn't good at all, because they're very upset. And so what they did was they'd shut down any kind of speaking at that point, any big book studies. My friend from Tulsa that I'd done these studies with, called The Big Book Stays Alive, had called me and said, David, we're not doing any more. I appreciate it, but we're not going any further from here. And so my whole life was, I said, well, what about the one? We had one coming up in Louisiana. I said, what about that one? And he said, well, we're already committed and they paid for it, so we're going to go ahead and go. But after that, we're done. And so we did. We went ahead and went. I thought it'd be a good time for me to get away. But what happened was I became so scared that I had picked up an STD that I ended up going. I got tested, and they told me that, it would be 3 to 5 days. If I didn't hear anything, everything would be okay. No news is good news. Of course, I couldn't do that. For those 3 to 5 days, I was absolutely insane in my mind. I was crazier than I had ever been. I was very dangerous at that point, too. I'd got that gun back out, and I was just insane. And so, my wife was noticing, he's not the same, but she just thought, well, it's the pills, it's this, he's going through a lot of stuff. And so I figured by getting away and going to the Tri-State Conference in Louisiana, doing the book study, that would help me out. And then whenever I got back, I could deal with it however I needed to, but I knew she was going to find out. And that weekend in Shreveport, Louisiana, she found out. And man, it was the most horrible weekend of my life. I can remember just sweating so profusely that it ended up soaking the whole bed. It was like there was a demon in me that finally released that night. But man, it was unbelievable what happened. And that was the longest ride home that I'd ever had from there back to Oklahoma. So what happened was my wife was heartbroken, and it didn't come in peace. The surrender came in piecemeal. It didn't come all at one time. She told me that night, said, David, I want you to tell me everything. I said, well, the book says that in a general, she said, I don't give a damn what that book says. And I don't care what you think you know about that book. I'm telling you right now, I know as much about that book as you do. And I'm telling you that I want to know names and events and places. I said, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to. And she said, then we're done. And so, long story short was I ended up telling her a few days later, and I went in and told her, I said, you're not going to like what I got to tell you, but if that's what it takes, then that's what I'm willing to do. And I sat down and I uncovered over 18 years worth of sexually acting out in this relationship and in this marriage, from escorts to the massages to the newcomers to anybody and everybody. It was unbelievable. And I was just so broken. And I can remember a pastor, he was a friend. And trust me, when I first came to the program, I didn't have any friends that were pastors, but this man had became my friend, and he come over and he talked with us for some time, and he shared some of his story. And he told me, he said, what would it take he asked her, what would it take for this marriage to work? And she said, he's going to have to get help, and he's going to have to go to counseling. He's going to have to do all this stuff, and he asked me, was I willing to do it? And I said, absolutely. So she said, but there's one more thing. He has to walk away from the Broken Bottle group. And that was probably the biggest hurt of any of it, because there again, we had founded that group. We'd watched it grow, but you know what? I didn't have any options. I wanted to save my marriage. And so I walked away. And what happened was I tried to get a hold of a few counselors, and I couldn't see any for a few months. And there was one option left. I had been to Sexaholics Anonymous before. I had came a couple of times, but I relapsed. And I had been struggling and relapsing for 25 years. And I would meet all these different guys in AA, and I would work the steps, and I'd go through the book, and I'd do all this stuff, and I'd relapse, and I'd relapse, and I'd relapse, and I just could not get sober. So when I talk with the new guys, sometimes they say, David, you don't have any idea how bad it is to struggle. And I ask them, how old are you again? 30, 32? 25 years, buddy. You were 7 years old whenever I began fighting with this lust, and I'm telling you, you just can't beat it. Or I've never been able to anyway. And so what happened was I came back to Sexaholics Anonymous. I got a hold of a guy in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he worked me through my first step. He had me to write, and that was something I just didn't want to do, but I did it because I was willing to do what I was told. So I wrote the first step. I went and read it to the group, and that was as far as he could take me. There was another guy on the morning DSR calls. He was a moderator. I picked him up. We went through a couple of steps together, and that's as far as he could take me. And I kept looking for somebody to work with in SA, and I was finding it a very hard time doing it. But I had been through this work, and I knew, so I picked up the Step into Action book, and I started following it to the letter. And the reason I liked it so much is because it went right along with the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, one of the things that I had done for so many years is I hadn't been in a lot of meetings. I was either leading the meeting, speaking at the meeting, running the meeting, something about the meeting. It was all about me, but I hadn't sat in a meeting in a long time. And so I started making a few meetings for SA. And there was a guy that heard me talk there about the big book, and he asked me, would I be willing to share my story on the morning DSR call? And so I did that. And then in a couple of months, he called me, or might not even been that long, and asked me would I do it again because they just couldn't find anybody to speak. So I did. And when I spoke that time, there was a guy from Pennsylvania that heard me, and he invited me over to speak at the noon group. And he said, here you will meet a lot of people. And sure enough, he was right. I spoke at the noon group, and there's where I met Dennis, and I met so many others. I picked up some guys to sponsor that day. That's something I needed desperately. And by then I'd been through the work and came through the steps. And so that's where my journey really began in Sexaholics Anonymous. It wasn't a short time until some guys got together. I think I sent Dennis a copy of the tapes of myself and Jim that had done the conference, The Big Book Stays Alive. And from there, we began talking about doing this particular book study here for Sexaholics Anonymous and gearing it toward sexual addiction. Since that time, my life has took off in a way that I could have never, ever dreamed. At first, I struggled a little bit with the obsession. I really did. And, but there was something that happened in between there. And I don't know, I found myself getting free and getting freer and getting freer. And I was really practicing that 10th and 11th step the way it is. And I'm working with a lot of guys, a lot of sponsees here in Sexaholics Anonymous. And I really became good friends with Dennis. And, I've been listening for a long time about getting a sponsor. And, for me, it took a little while over here. It really did before I conceded to one. Shortly after I spoke at the noon meeting, the guy that is my sponsor today, Steve D, spoke there. And I just had Dennis to send me a list of the speakers for the noon group because I needed something to do in the mornings whenever I was on my truck. And I started listening to these speakers, and I listened to Steve, and I thought, there's recovery. There's the recovery I'm looking for right there. And so I made contact with Steve, and we ended up hooking up together. And that's how it's been ever since. Today, my life is in a great place. I've been free from the obsession for many months. I really have. I've been sober since late September of 2019, but I call my sobriety date October 1st, 2019, because I didn't want to cheat on a day or two or whatever. I really couldn't remember, but I knew if I picked October 1st that I'd be safe there. And what has happened is I really began to learn how to communicate with people in a better way than I ever had before, and particularly with my wife. My relationship there has grown into a place that is better than the best I could have ever imagined. It's just unbelievable what has happened in our marriage. In fact, I thought about asking her to sit in, for a few minutes to share what had happened, what Sexaholics Anonymous had done for our marriage. And, I didn't go all the way through with that. But anyway, I just wanted for anybody that is struggling, that is new, or if you've been here for a long time, I know today beyond any shadow of a doubt that if you will take this book and you will work these steps as it's outlined with somebody who has been there, the obsession will leave. But greater than that, we get to make contact. We get to have this relationship with a power greater than ourselves. And really, that's been the best part of all of it for me, is that life-changing experience and the relationship that it brought me to with God. Now, I already had a relationship. Obviously, I couldn't have stayed sober 26 years had I not. But right there in chapter 6, on page 72 at the beginning, it says, having made our personal inventory, what shall we do about it? It says we've been trying to get a new attitude and a new relationship with our Creator. And that's what I found. I found a new relationship with a loving Creator. Step 11 has been hit and miss, up and down. I've started looking at some things now. There's 12 steps, 12 prayers, 12 meditations, and 12 visions between page 83 and 88 of the book. And I've really started taking and using a lot of those. And man, it's been life-changing. And I plan to share that as well as we move on with the rest of the study. But that's, in short, is really, what's happened to me. I'm so grateful for Sexaholics Anonymous. I got a call the other day. I was in Tulsa, and I was on my way back, and I got a call, and it was from my friend, the old guy that I did the Big Book studies with, and Big Book Stays Alive. And he asked me, he said, David, how's the zipper problem? And I said, well, by God's grace, it doesn't exist. And I said, you really know that wasn't ever the problem anyway, huh? And he said, yeah, I knew that, but you didn't know that. Lack of power is our dilemma. And I smiled, and I said, yeah, and he said, so you think that you have it under control? I said, no, but I think God does. And, I think just for today, I'm going to depend on that. I've been going to Sexaholics Anonymous, and I really love the people that I've met there. And they're teaching me a way to live. But you know what's even better than that? They've been through what I've been through, and they didn't judge me the way some of you guys did. And so I'm forever grateful for that fellowship. So he told me, he said, well, we were wondering, I got together and talked with Joe's wife and a few others, and we was wondering if you'd like to come back to the Big Book Stays Alive, and let's try to pick it up and go again. And I said, yeah, absolutely, I'd be willing to do that. But there's only one thing, is I'm never going to exclude the fellowship of SA. That's a part of my life now, and it always will be. So, and he was very cool. He said, yeah, in fact, I'd love for him to attend any workshop, anything that we do. I'd be very grateful for that. And for what they've done for you, I love them already. So, things are looking up in that area again. My career is in a better place than it's ever been. My marriage is in a better place than ever. I'm so grateful. I spent the whole day with my wife yesterday, and she didn't want to kill me or any of that. We had a great time. And so life is good. It works if we work it. It really, really does. So, I hope it helps somebody. I really did want to share experience, strength, and hope. But I'm so thankful because there again, the Big Book study is what's really, it's changed my life coming over here and sharing with you what I've learned all these years. So, Dennis, thank you for your service, brother. Thank all of you for coming out every week. I mean, gosh, that's a lot of weeks in a row to come out and listen to someone do most of the talking. So I'm so grateful you've done that, and I love you. Thank you.
All right, we have our first question. Gene, you're up.
Okay, yeah, thank you, David. I have a lot of compassion for you, and I can relate to you. I was sober 25 years when I finally found SA through a lot of pain and heartache and trouble like that, and your story just grips me. It brings me back, and what I'm thinking, I've seen, a lot of speakers and leaders in both programs have difficulty. First, like I've had trouble going back to AA and speaking there, and I don't leave SA out of my talk. I'm not promoting. I'm not trying to get anybody to join me, but what I wanted to share with you about the ego. How do you deal with your ego today? What are you doing? How's God working with you with that, and how you're doing? And I'll pass.
Thank you, Gene, man. It's always a pleasure to hear you, buddy. I've heard you in some meetings, and I just always enjoy your shares. Thank you. That 10 and 11, I just can't say it enough because and Charlie had taught me that years ago, that working steps 10 was 4 through 9 on a daily basis. And he always said, you can never you just can't stay the way you are and work that step. And so with my ego, that's been the biggest thing, is to spot whatever emotion that is, to ask God at once to remove it, discuss it with someone, make amends quickly. That's a big one for me there. And then turn my thoughts to someone I can help. And, at first I would just text that, but it didn't take very long for me to realize that that wasn't going to work if I wasn't going to be doing what it said. And once I started doing that, man, it has really, really kept me in a humble place. I've been so grateful for those steps. And that's something, for all those years in AA, I just never done those steps. I could read that part of the book, break it down, share it with people, make it sound so good, but I'd never done it. And man, today I guarantee you, when I work with a new guy, that's the first thing we do. We start in that step, and because it's such an ego deflation. And in Bill's story, he talked about, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, page 14, he said, the destruction of the ego is basically what he said, I must turn in all things to the Father of the light that presides over us all. And really that's step 11 for me. And so going back at night, making that review, looking at those things, admitting it, getting honest, and thinking, what, I was wrong here today. I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to have to make one tonight. In fact, my son and I had a couple of words earlier, and I was wrong. And, I'm going to have to admit it. But, man, that sure keeps my ego in check. So anyway, Gene, it's good to see you here today. I'm sure glad you came, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you, Gene. Thank you, David. Jason, you're up.
Oh, thanks, Dennis. Yeah, no, great to hear. I really relate to the story, having a birth date of December 98 and another fellowship. And it was only coming to this fellowship to truly be set free. But I just want to say it's really great to hear, you talk about being set free from this addiction. And, I can really hear it in your voice. It's just magic. With your marriage, what's been really important to, rekindle that intimacy and just to, start an honest line of communication? Pass.
Yeah, thank you, brother. It's always good to see you. I love seeing your 3-month ship there. Congratulations. That's wonderful. Man, I tell you, I've never really been able to communicate with people a lot unless I was doing all the talking, of course, at an event or something. But, today I find that pretty easy with my wife. It's not something I just woke up and started doing one day. I really had to practice that. That had to become a part of practicing the principles in all of my affairs. It really did. The book over on page 18 talks about, a much more important demonstration of our principles. See, not just talking about them, but actually demonstrating in all of my affairs. It starts in the home. And I had a sponsor, he would tell me, David, you take care of everything under your roof, the rest of your life is going to take care of itself. And I just really never believed that, but I do today. It's absolutely true. My wife and I have great communication. There's things that I don't want to tell her sometimes. I was sitting on the couch a few months ago and a text came through, and those were the kind of texts that I've always loved to receive, but I didn't recognize the number because I've blocked and got rid of it. I've cleaned my phone up completely. One of the things I did with her was I just handed her the phone. I said, you're free to look at this anytime, any day. Let me tell you all the secrets that I've used. Let me show you all of these passwords and all these different things that I've used. Watch how I will use the name of a girl named Christy. Look how I'll take and I will make this Chris T, like it's a guy. But, and I did all of this stuff and I showed her that. But I was sitting there one evening, text came through and I recalled from it as from a hot flame, like the book talks about. I called her in, I showed her immediately. And, that opened up, there was some fear and stuff there. But, the communication built and built as I continued to expose myself more and more. I didn't want to go into a lot of great detail about the past. I'd already done that with her. But what I did was, I make sure today that anything that comes up, I get with her. I try to stay transparent as I can there. And it's been a lifesaver. It's really changed us a lot. I know she tells me every day that it has been such a blessing, to watch me grow. And it has been for me because she's been in the program for a long time, and her faith tradition is Christianity. And she really practices that. Today, when there is an argument or something like that, nothing ever comes up about the past. Well, you've done this for 18 years, so now So I'm grateful for her. She really works a good program, and it's a wonderful relationship. One I'm glad I didn't lose for sure. So it's good to see you, brother, always.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, David. Susie, you're up.
Okay, thank you, David. I really appreciate hearing your story. And I actually have several questions, so I'll just throw them all out there and you can pick and choose if you want to answer it. One you may have already addressed just now, and I was going to ask about how did your wife deal with knowing all the details? I think that would be really difficult. Separate question, when you left that broken bottle group, was there another meeting that accepted you and that you felt comfortable in? Did you have a place to go? And then you didn't say much about your time. This may be over the line. Forgive me if you don't want to answer it. That's okay. But if you were incarcerated, was there any 12-step programs brought into you or offered to you during that time? And yeah, I'll stop with those. Thanks. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. And I'm sorry I didn't get to hear your wife share some today. That would be nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And she stood ready to do that. In fact, we had talked about it. If we had went on with the book study, I was going to have her to come in and do it, and probably should have anyway. So I apologize for that. I didn't know how the group would feel about that, for one thing. So I wanted to make sure the group was okay with her doing that before I just threw that surprise on them. But, whenever I was incarcerated, there wasn't a 12-step program offered to me. The Gideons showed up, of all people. And God, I hated them from day one, and I just didn't want them around, and I cussed them and all this stuff. And they gave me a Bible, and I threw it down. And I remember, we ended up tearing the pages out of it, smoking cigarettes and stuff. It's just like, ugh. But anyway, some years later, I did get to make amends to the Gideons, and particularly with the man that brought the message to me. I really loved that old guy. But, I was in the midst of my illness with lust still at that time. And what happened was, because I had some experience with speaking, they set me up as a statewide speaker for their group. And that ended up attracting other people. And, so I was deep into my disease. But what did happen was, whenever I did come through this work in SA, I was able to go to some of the men that was in charge of all of that, and I was able to make amends to them. I didn't go into great detail about what I'd done. I just told them that the life I was living was not worthy to be discussed or to be in the churches to where they were sending me. And they were very good with that. And then, I hope that answers that question. And then you had asked me about the Broken Bottle group. In fact, what happened was, the pastor that ran the church, he didn't want to let the group continue to meet there anymore. And in fact, he said, if the Greens, that's me and my wife, wasn't going to be kind of looking after the group or whatever, that he wasn't going to let them stay. And I really begged him to let them stay. I said, there's some good men there that can step up and take the lead. And he said no. So he asked them to leave and find another place to meet, which they did. They ended up going back to where we came from 13 years earlier. But I didn't have any other meeting to go to. In fact, I didn't go to any meetings for a while, other than that morning DSR call. And I was getting sicker and sicker and sicker, sitting here sober in SA. And thankfully, I ended up speaking, and that led me to the Noon group. And then I met Dennis, and then eventually I started coming into the Monday and Thursdays, actually. And that's where I met you and met several of the others. And, and then now the book study. So I have a pretty big circle now in SA, and I sure am grateful for it. I love this program over here. I don't plan on going anywhere. I really don't. So anyway, I hope that answers some of those. And it's always good to see you, Miss Susie, always. And I would love for you guys to meet my wife sometime. I really would. She's great. So.
And I do believe that was the plan, that on either the meeting or the final meeting, that she would come in and share a little bit about the story with you. Susie, did you have a third question? I can't remember.
Yeah, I couldn't remember either.
How did your wife deal with all the details?
Oh my gosh. A lot of hurt, a lot of shame, a lot of tears, a lot of meanness from that woman. And she's so sweet and very kind and always really has been, but she became very upset and very mad. And she was really upset because a lot of the people that I had acted out with in the fellowship was good friends of hers, or she had sponsored. And it was almost like everybody knew something about this but her. And she was so hurt and devastated over it. And what happened was she told me, she said, I'll never go back to AA again. And to this day, she has not, 15 months later. But she did go to Al-Anon, and she ended up getting a sponsor there. She had been in that program before, but she has really took to the steps and worked them good and stays in contact with her sponsor. She does the nightly reviews in step 10 every day, same as me. And recently she came to some S-Anon meetings, and she really connected because she told me, she said, I can't find anybody that's been through what I've been through. And I said, well, I know a lot of them. Now, trust me, I don't know the women there, but I know some men, and their wives are there. And so I talked to a guy I was sponsoring down in Florida, and he got me the number of a WhatsApp group, and she was able to connect. And in fact, I've shared the friendship that I've made with you, and she's excited to meet you as well. So I'm grateful. Thank you so much for your friendship. I love you.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you so much, Susie. If anybody else has a question, I'm not sure, Dean, if you have your hand raised. I don't know if it's a glitch or your microphone, but at this point, if you'd like to unmute and ask a question, or anybody at this point can just unmute and share or ask a question to David. We have a couple minutes left.
Well, thank you, David. This is Dean from Kansas. Hey, Dennis, you must be able to read minds, because I was just thinking, well, should I? Anyway. David, thank you for your talk today. Yes, very moving. I can see what this program's done for you. Thank you for your sponsorship. I just had a fear and anxiety, and I just, in fact, 10-stepped it with you. I sent you a text, but I'll share it with the group. It's kind of a mixture of pride, I think. It's fear, anxiety, which is me. When I hear speakers, I've listened to, multiple speakers over the years, Roy Kay and yourself, of course, and that a thought comes to me that, hey, man, you've never acted out physically outside your marriage. And, you're not like the rest of these guys. This a pride thing, but then the other thing, a fear thing. Therefore, see what happened to them. It ain't going to work for you, man, because you didn't go as far as them. I don't know if I'm getting through. So it's like a big mixture, a big mess. And I just thought I'd share that with you and the group. Any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely, Dean. It's good to hear you as always, brother. I know your story, and I guarantee you have something to offer here. I don't think it's about how much or any of that we acted out. In fact, I hope I didn't spend too much time with that in my story, because I was really wanting to get to the miracle that has happened in its place. And I say that all the time. I know you've heard me say it. We all know how to act out. It's what we do to keep from acting out is the real message here. And so whenever that voice is talking to me, the one that's talking to you, well, I haven't done this and I haven't done that and you haven't done all this, that's the wrong voice. I want to lean into the one that says, hey, share your recovery, share what happened, share your experience, not your knowledge or ideas or any of that. And you have some good experience to share, and you're definitely going to have some coming up, because I know where you're at in the work and you're doing very good with it. So I encourage you to continue with what you're doing, and you will most definitely be sharing experience, strength, and hope with me as your sponsor for sure. That's, I usually ask guys, are you willing to go to any lengths to stay sober? And they say, yeah. And I say, okay, you're the speaker next week. So, it's anyway, good to see you, brother. Holler at me tomorrow if you would.
God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, David. Yeah, I've discovered that the 20 questions in the white book has two answers. I used to think it was yes or no, but it's yes and not yet. So is there anybody else that would like to ask David a question? Steve, you're up.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. Thanks so much, David. I greatly appreciated hearing your story. I'd heard bits and pieces, but this is really a privilege to sit and listen to your story and understand where you've come from. I would just, I don't think I have a question. I just wanted to kind of maybe emphasize a couple things. One is, you said that it was really a lack of doing step 9 that kind of kept you from really recovering from lust and Alcoholics Anonymous. And, I think that's such an important point to really emphasize in that doing the step 9 is as a way we begin to find some relief from our guilt and shame, because I just know from my own recovery and working the steps that going through step 9 was going back to people that I offended and hurt, and realizing that they didn't hold those things against me like I held them against myself, and I just remember getting into SA and feeling like, wow, I don't even have a place on the planet. I just felt so much shame and guilt. So, and I've seen a lot of people I sponsor come up against steps 8 and 9, and they just can't seem to push through that emotional block. So that's, I think I'm glad you pointed that out, because I think that's so important for us to work through that. And then the other thing was just trust, building trust over time. And that's something my wife has told me as well. I mean, I had similar experience when I really shared all my details with her, but not inadvertently. She read my first step, and it really kind of put our marriage in a whole different footing. But she has told me many times that it was building trust. Trust was pretty much in the toilet when all that happened, but it's trusting in God and really unconditionally, and then building trust in the marriage just by continuing to work the program and do what's needed and do whatever it takes to stay sober. So thanks again so much for your share, brother. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. It's good to see you, brother. Looking forward to you this week. So,
yeah.
All right, everybody. Well, with that, that'll conclude. David, thank you so much. That was such a powerful share for me personally. It was, man, I just loved hearing that. It was really a blessing. And I look forward to the 10th when we get to continue on the Big Book Unveiled journey. So, David, if you wouldn't mind, if you would close us out with either the Lord's Prayer or a program prayer of your choosing for the sexaholic who's still sick and suffering in and out of these rooms.
Absolutely. If we could just do a moment of silence for those that are suffering in and out, and we'd follow with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. All right, everybody, keep coming back. It works if you work it, so work it, because you're definitely. Thank you, David.
Love you guys. Thank you.
Thanks,
See you all.
Steve,
Take care
thank you,
now.
brother.
Thank you all.